He said I was the luckiest wife alive until I realized I was just a pawn in his game. If you looked at my life from the outside, you'd think I was living every woman's dream. My name is Emma Carter, 32 years old, wife to the successful businessman, Daniel Carter. We lived in a pristine suburban mansion where the lawns were always manicured, the neighbors waved like clockwork, and everything appeared picture perfect. But perfection is often just a mask, and I was suffocating behind it. When Daniel and I first met, he was charming in that effortless way dangerous men always are, the kind of man who made you feel like the only woman in a crowded room. I was a rising attorney back then, sharp, independent, and proud of it. Daniel admired that, or so I thought. Within a year, we were married. He insisted I didn't need to work anymore. "Why stress yourself in courtrooms when I can give you the world?" He'd whisper, tucking a stray hair behind my ear like he was doing me a favor. I told myself it was love. I told myself stepping back from my career was a choice, my choice. But choices don't come with invisible chains. At first it was subtle. Daniel took over handling our finances to make things easier. My credit cards were replaced with ones tied to his accounts. He encouraged me to let go of old friendships. They don't understand our lifestyle. Family visits became rare, always due to his important meetings or sudden business trips. I wasn't isolated overnight. No, Daniel was too smart for that. He built my cage slowly, gilding it with just enough luxury that I almost thanked him for locking the door. It wasn't until I stumbled upon the bank statements that the cracks began to show. One afternoon, while Daniel was away on yet another business retreat, I needed a document from his office. That's when I saw it. Folders filled with financial records I never knew existed, accounts I'd never heard of, transfers, large ones, money moving between offshore accounts, properties being signed off not by him but by me, except I'd never signed anything. My heart pounded as I flipped through the forged documents. My signature was there perfect, down to the last curl, but it wasn't mine. It was his version of me. The compliant, invisible Emma he had crafted on paper. When Daniel returned, I confronted him. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "What is this, Daniel? Why are there documents with my name signing away properties I've never seen?" He didn't yell. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he gave me that condescending smile, the one I used to mistake for patience. "Emma, I knew this day would come. I've been so worried about you." I blinked, confused. "Worried about what?" He sighed deeply, as if carrying a burden too heavy for words. "You've been forgetful lately. Paranoid, seeing things that aren't there." I spoke to Dr. Hayes. He agrees you might be having another episode. Another episode. My blood ran cold, Daniel. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a soft, almost pitying tone. "That's exactly what concerns me, darling." That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house felt like it was closing in on me. I tried calling my old friend, but my phone was dead, no service, the Wi-Fi was down too. Coincidence, I doubted it. Morning came like a slow, creeping dread. I heard the knock at the door just as I was making coffee, my mind still racing with plans to escape to gather evidence to run. But when I opened it, 2 men in white coats stood there, flanked by a solemn-faced nurse. "Mrs. Carter, we're here to escort you for your evaluation. Your husband signed the necessary forms." I froze. What evaluation? I didn't agree to anything. Daniel appeared behind me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder, as if this was all a misunderstanding at brunch. "It's for your own good, Em. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." I looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the man I once loved. But all I saw was calculation, cold, ruthless. The game was already in motion, and I was a piece. He was removing from the board. I screamed, I fought. But in the end, they overpowered me for safety, they said. As they strapped me onto the gurney, Daniel leaned down and whispered in my ear, his breath chilling against my skin. "You should have just played the role, Emma. Now they'll believe whatever I tell them." The last thing I saw before the van doors closed was Daniel standing in the doorway of our perfect house, waving at the neighbors like nothing was wrong. And just like that, I was erased, not with violence, but with a signature. Not buried in the ground, but locked away where no one would question why I disappeared. But what Daniel didn't know, what he could never understand, was that I wasn't the fragile wife he thought he'd broken. I was still Emma Carter, and I was going to make sure he regretted every move he'd made. They thought locking me away would silence me. But sometimes silence is where the loudest plans are made. The walls were too white, too clean. The kind of sterile perfection that didn't soothe you, it suffocated you. I'd been in the psychiatric ward for 3 days, or at least that's what the nurse told me. Time blurred when every hour felt like a lifetime. The routine was designed to break you. Wake up pills, questions masked as kindness, more pills, lights out. They called it treatment. I called it imprisonment. I wasn't allowed mirrors in case of episodes. They said I wasn't allowed sharp objects, privacy, or even a locked bathroom door. Every move I made was watched. Every word I spoke was scribbled into a file labeled Patient Emma Carter, Diagnosis, Under Evaluation. But here's the thing. No one in that place seemed to understand. I was more lucid than I'd ever been. Because when they strip everything from you, your freedom, your dignity, your voice, all that's left is clarity. And my clarity had one focus. Daniel. I replayed his words over and over in my head. Now they'll believe whatever I tell them. He was right, out there in the real world. Daniel Carter was a respected man, a philanthropist even. No one would question him when he said his poor wife was battling mental illness. It was the perfect cover for whatever scheme he had planned, whether it was stealing my assets, tarnishing my name, or erasing me completely. But Daniel made one mistake. He underestimated the woman he tried to bury. On my 4th day inside, I met Lily. She was young, mid-20s, probably fresh out of nursing school with kind eyes that didn't look at me like I was broken, while the other staff treated me like a ticking time bomb. Lily saw something else, something human. It started small. She offered me an extra blanket when the nights were too cold. She smuggled me a real cup of coffee instead of the watered-down excuse they served in the common room. But what caught my attention was when she whispered, "You don't belong here, do you?" while checking my vitals. I didn't answer at first. Trust wasn't a luxury I could afford. But Lily didn't push. She just gave me a knowing glance and moved on. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, not with fear, but with strategy. I was a lawyer once I knew how the system worked. Daniel had used it against me, but that also meant I knew how to turn it back on him. I just needed a connection to the outside world, someone who could move where I couldn't. The next morning during rounds, I took a chance. As Lily adjusted my chart, I whispered, "Do you believe in justice?" She looked at me, curiosity flickering across her face. "I believe it's rare," she replied softly. Why I leaned in, my voice steady but low, because I need someone brave enough to help me find it. For a moment, I thought she'd report me, label me delusional like the rest. But instead, she slipped a small note into my hand before walking away. It read, "Meet me by the supply closet at midnight. Hope is a dangerous thing in a place designed to crush it. But that night, hope was all I had." When midnight came, I crept through the dimly lit corridor, my heart pounding louder than my footsteps. Lily was waiting, glancing over her shoulder nervously. Without wasting time, I explained everything. Daniel's manipulation, the forged documents, the setup. I could see skepticism flicker in her eyes, but it didn't last long. "You don't talk like someone who's lost touch with reality," she finally said. "You talk like someone who's been betrayed." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I need to contact someone. My old colleague, Mark Lawson. He's a lawyer. If I can get him involved, I can prove I'm not supposed to be here." Lily hesitated, knowing full well that smuggling a phone into this place could cost her job, or worse. But then she squared her shoulders, determination replacing doubt. "I'll get you a phone, but you have to promise me one thing: when you get out, you expose every part of this." I met her gaze, a silent pact forming between us. "I promise." 2 nights later, Lily slipped a burner phone under my pillow during shift change. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the rush of finally having a lifeline. I dialed Mark's number, praying he hadn't changed it. After 2 rings, his familiar voice answered, groggy but alert. "Hello," I nearly broke down hearing it, "Mark. It's Emma." There was a pause, then disbelief. "Emma. Where the hell have you been?" Daniel said. "Forget what?" Daniel said. I cut in. "I need your help. I've been locked in a psychiatric ward under false pretenses. Daniel's behind it. I have proof, but I need you to move fast." Mark didn't ask stupid questions. That's why I called him. Tell me everything he said, his tone shifting into professional mode. For the next hour, I laid out every detail: the forged signatures, the financial theft, Daniel's manipulation. I could almost hear Mark scribbling notes. "All right," he said when I finished. "First, we get an independent psych evaluation. Then we dig into Daniel's transactions. If he's as sloppy as you say, there'll be a trail." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. "Thank you, Mark. I owe you my life." "No," he replied firmly. "You're going to take your life back, and I'm going to help you destroy his in the process." As I hung up, a grim smile spread across my face. Daniel thought he'd silenced me by locking me behind padded walls. What he didn't know was that he'd just given me the perfect alibi and all the time I needed to plan his downfall. The game wasn't over, it had just begun. You don't need to scream for justice. Sometimes the quietest moves make the loudest impact. The strange thing about being locked away is that once you stop fighting the walls, they become your allies. They listen. They hold your secrets. And in my case, they gave me the silence I needed to build a case that would destroy Daniel Carter. Mark didn't waste time. 2 days after our call, Lily slipped me a note during breakfast. Independent psych evaluation scheduled. Be ready. I folded the note carefully, keeping my face blank. In here, any sign of hope could be twisted into manic behavior. I'd learned that the hard way. When Dr. Evelyn Harper walked into the sterile room that afternoon, I knew immediately she wasn't like the others. No clipboard already filled with assumptions, no patronizing smile, just sharp eyes that assessed me the way I used to assess witnesses on the stand. Mrs. Carter, she began, her voice calm but firm. I'm here at the court's request to conduct an independent evaluation. This conversation will determine whether you belong here or if further investigation is needed. I nodded, sitting straighter. Then let's begin. For 2 hours, Dr. Harper asked every question imaginable about my past, my marriage, my so-called episodes. I answered with precision, weaving in enough legal awareness to show her exactly who I was. Not a delusional wife, but a woman trapped by a master manipulator. By the end, she closed her notebook and gave me a look I hadn't seen in weeks. Respect. You're not mentally ill, Mrs. Carter. You're cornered. I swallowed hard, the weight of validation hitting me like a wave. Can you get me out? She gave a small nod. I'll file my report today, but be careful. Your husband won't take this lightly. She was right. Daniel was too invested in my disappearance to let me slip through his fingers easily. That night, Lily brought more news. Mark had uncovered several forged documents, deeds, account transfers, even a life insurance policy with my forged signature. Daniel wasn't just stealing from me. He was planning for my permanent absence. But the real weapon came when Lily handed me a small recorder. Next time he visits, she whispered, get him talking. I didn't have to wait long. Daniel showed up the next day dressed in his usual tailored suit, holding a bouquet of lilies like he was visiting a convalescing wife instead of his latest victim. The nurses cooed at his devotion. I wanted to vomit. He sat across from me in the visitation room, his smile as polished as ever. How are we feeling today, Emma? I met his gaze, masking my loathing with a practiced softness. Better, clearer. He leaned in, lowering his voice. Good. Then you understand what needs to happen. Sign the transfer papers I left with Dr. Hayes, and this can all be over. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. Why are you doing this, Daniel? I was a good wife. His smile widened, arrogance dripping from every word. Because you stopped being useful the moment you started asking questions. This isn't personal, Em. It's just business. I could feel the recorder burning a hole in my pocket, capturing every syllable. You really think no one will find out? I whispered, letting a hint of fear lace my voice. Daniel chuckled, sitting back like he'd already won. Who's going to believe the crazy wife over Daniel Carter? I own the narrative Emma always have. When the visit ended, I walked back to my room with my heart pounding, not from fear, but from victory. I handed the recorder to Lily, who promised to get it to Mark immediately. The next 48 hours moved like a storm gathering strength. Dr. Harper's report hit the court. Mark filed a motion demanding my immediate release based on false imprisonment and submitted the audio recording as evidence of Daniel's intent. By the time the court order arrived at the facility, I was already packed. Not that I had much to take. Lily hugged me tightly before I left. You're the bravest person I've ever met, she whispered. I smiled, but it wasn't bravery coursing through me, it was resolve. As I stepped outside for the first time in weeks, the sun felt different, sharper. Like a spotlight, not on me, but on Daniel. Mark was waiting by the car, holding a thick folder. Welcome back to the real world, he said, handing me the file. Everything we need to bury him is in here. I flipped through the documents, bank statements, forged contracts, the insurance policy. Each page was a nail in Daniel's coffin. We go to court, I said, my voice steady, but not just to clear my name. I want him to feel what it's like to lose everything. Mark grinned, the same ruthless spark I once had in the courtroom shining in his eyes. Then let's build him a prison he can't escape. As we drove away, I glanced back at the facility, my temporary cage. Daniel thought it would be my end, but it was where I sharpened my claws. The silent case was no longer silent. It was about to roar. He built his empire on lies. I dismantled it with the truth, one piece at a time. The courtroom was colder than I remembered, or maybe it was just the weight of what was about to happen. I sat beside Mark at the plaintiff's table, dressed not in designer labels or fragile pastels like Daniel once preferred me to wear, but in a sharp, tailored black suit. I wasn't here as a wife begging for justice. I was here as a woman reclaiming everything that was stolen from her and more. The doors opened and Daniel Carter walked in, confident as ever. His expensive lawyer flanked him, and that smug grin painted his face like it was permanent. But when his eyes landed on me, free, composed, and staring him down, his steps faltered. Just for a second, but I saw it fear. The judge called the court to order. This wasn't just a civil case. No, Mark made sure of that. Daniel was facing charges of false imprisonment, fraud, forgery, financial theft, and conspiracy. And today was the hearing that would decide whether those charges stuck and whether Daniel would walk out a free man or be escorted out in handcuffs. Mark stood first, his voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. Your Honor, we will present clear evidence that Mr. Daniel Carter orchestrated a calculated scheme to have his wife, Emma Carter, unlawfully committed to a psychiatric facility for the sole purpose of stealing her assets, forging legal documents, and attempting to erase her autonomy. Daniel's lawyer countered with the expected performance, painting Daniel as a concerned husband, claiming I was unstable, that this was all a tragic misunderstanding fueled by mental health struggles. I let them talk, let them spin their web of lies, because I knew what was coming. Mark called me to the stand first. As I took my oath and sat, I could feel Daniel's gaze burning into me. I didn't flinch. Mrs. Carter, Mark began, can you describe your mental state prior to being admitted to the psychiatric facility? Clear, I answered confidently. I was never mentally ill. My husband fabricated symptoms to justify having me committed. He nodded, leading me through every step, how Daniel isolated me, forged documents, manipulated doctors. Then came the moment we'd prepared for. Do you recognize this device? Mark asked, holding up the recorder Lily had smuggled in. Yes, it contains a recording of my husband admitting to his actions during a visit to the facility. The judge gestured for it to be played. The courtroom fell silent as Daniel's voice echoed through the speakers. Who's going to believe the crazy wife over Daniel Carter? I own the narrative. Emma always have. A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his lawyer scrambling for objections, but it was too late. The truth was out. Mark didn't stop there. He introduced forged documents with expert testimony confirming the signatures were falsified, bank records showing Daniel's embezzlement. The life insurance policy, Daniel's endgame if locking me away hadn't worked. By the time Mark rested our case, Daniel's mask had cracked. His lawyer was sweating, bullets fumbling through weak defenses. Then came the final blow. Dr. Evelyn Harper took the stand presenting her independent evaluation. Mrs. Carter exhibits no signs of mental illness. In my professional opinion, her commitment was entirely unwarranted and orchestrated under false pretenses. The judge reviewed the evidence in silence, his expression unreadable. Then, with a heavy voice, he delivered the words I'd been waiting to hear. This court finds sufficient cause to proceed with all charges against Daniel Carter. Bail is denied due to flight risk. Mr. Carter, you are hereby remanded into custody. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut around Daniel's wrists was more satisfying than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. As the bailiffs led him away, Daniel turned to me, fury replacing fear. You think this is over? He hissed. I stood meeting him eye to eye with a calm he couldn't touch. Oh, it's far from over, Daniel. This is just the sentencing phase of your life. He was dragged out of the courtroom, his empire collapsing behind him. Not with an explosion, but with the quiet, methodical dismantling of every lie he ever told. Mark clapped a hand on my shoulder, grinning. You did it. I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. No, we're just getting started because beyond the prison bars awaiting Daniel, there were still assets to reclaim, reputations to rebuild, and a story to tell. Not as a victim, but as a survivor who turned her silence into a weapon. He stole my freedom, now I own his. It's funny how freedom feels different when you've had it taken from you. Before Daniel locked me away, I thought freedom was the house, the luxury, the so-called perfect life. But standing outside that courthouse watching headlines about Daniel Carter's arrest flood every news outlet, I realized freedom was so much simpler. It was owning my story and making sure no one could ever write it for me again. Daniel's trial was set for months ahead, but he wouldn't be enjoying penthouse views while he waited. No, he was denied bail. Turns out judges don't take kindly to men who forge documents, gaslight their wives, and try to erase them for profit. In the weeks that followed, I did more than just sit back and watch his empire crumble. I made sure I was the one holding the sledgehammer. Every asset Daniel had tried to steal was frozen, investigated, and one by one returned properties. Bank accounts, investments. He thought I didn't know about Mark, and I worked tirelessly turning every hidden corner of Daniel's financial web into a noose around his neck. But I didn't stop there. With Mark's guidance and a bit of my old legal fire, I launched Silent Voices, a foundation dedicated to women who'd been victims of financial abuse and coercive control. The media loved it. Wife who brought down Daniel Carter turns pain into power. Let them talk. Every article, every interview was another reminder to Daniel sitting in his cell that I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Lily became my first hire. I made sure she had a scholarship waiting for her to finish her advanced medical studies. Without her, I might still be rotting behind padded walls. Weeks turned into months. Daniel's trial came and went like a storm he never saw coming. 15 years. That was the sentence, no parole for the first 10. But I wasn't done, not until I looked him in the eye one last time, so I visited. The prison smelled like regret and lost power. The guards led me to the visitation room where Daniel sat shackled wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed beautifully with his arrogance. When he saw me, he smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Come to gloat, Emma," he sneered. I sat down calmly, folding my hands on the table. "No, I came to thank you." That wiped the smirk off his face. "Thank me," he spat. I leaned in my voice, steady and cool. "If you hadn't tried to bury me, I would have spent the rest of my life being the version of Emma you created, silent, controlled, decorative." His jaw tightened, but I didn't stop. "But you made a mistake, Daniel. You showed me exactly how dangerous I could be when I have nothing left to lose." He laughed bitterly. "Enjoy it while it lasts. People forget, empires rebuild." I smiled, slow, deliberate maybe. "But you'll still be here counting bricks and days. And every time you hear my name, it'll remind you that I didn't just survive you, I owned you." The guard signaled that time was up. I stood, giving Daniel one last look. Pity, perhaps, but mostly satisfaction. "Goodbye. Daniel, enjoy your freedom, what little you have left." As I walked out of that prison, the air felt lighter, not because Daniel was locked away, but because I had finally closed the chapter he tried to write for me. Months later, Silent Voices expanded nationwide. Survivors reached out sharing stories eerily similar to mine, stories that no longer ended in silence. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the city, not a mansion but something I owned outright, I received a letter, no sender. Just one sentence typed neatly on white paper. "You'll always be mine." I chuckled, tossing it into the fireplace without a second thought, because Daniel never understood. I was never his, and now I belonged to no one but myself.